We can end that out! We can end that out! Hey! We can end that out!
And we're back.
That was all right.
It's okay.
Okay. I mean, I did a different count-in than I usually do. I did the more swingy polka thing with a 1 and a 2 and a... I'm not going to do that again.
It's okay. I mean, this is like a experimental playground, man. Do whatever you want.
Yeah, right? This is an experimental podcast. We're just experimenting. Speaking of experimenting, maybe everybody noticed that the first half of this double part episode was videos in the car and in Dresden and stuff like that. And we just kind of wanted to touch a little bit about why we did that and what that was all about. So
Yeah. So why did we do that?
I thought you were going to tell. Because I don't really know. You just handed me a mic and say some stupid shit. Like,
I mean, we had always floated the idea of doing a remote episode just to see if it would work. And
always is a relative word.
well, anyways, I picked
Since we met 26 years ago.
I picked up some lav mics for my own video production stuff and realized that they record remotely wirelessly. And then we were, as a side note, planning a trip with Yumi, Karina, and Julie. Every now and then, the four of us will hop in the car and go to go hiking or go visit some random place in Germany that we haven't really explored before, just to get the fuck out of town and to see something new. So we thought it would be interesting experiment to try and record it while we did it.
Kind of like a man on the street sort of experiment.
Yeah.
Is that what you call it? Man on the street?
Well, man on the street's usually like when you go out on the street and you're interviewing people and asking random people on the street questions.
Oh, okay. But we do kind of interview each other. In our,
yeah, but we're not really random men on the street.
Okay. So forget
We're familiar men in a car.
Okay, that's good. We did the familiar men in a car and familiar men on the street. Yeah, but I mean, I think it came out pretty cool.
It was fun. I actually had a really nice time, and we got to see some parts of Dresden that I had never seen before, and saw the hygiene museum. That was weird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know what's funny though? I didn't listen to it until after we were in Dresden, but I was talking in episode 9 about how I love history podcasts. So I was listening to this podcast about the fire bombings in Dresden during World War II, and not that that's very funny, but at some point he starts talking about the hygiene museum. I'm like, oh shit, we were there. And he says he talks about the hygiene museum. He talks about it, and it was basically what we saw. And then he said during World War II, Hitler updated it to be more about the hygiene of races. He got really like eugenics and racist with it. And then after 1945, they went kind of back to the OG. So I had no idea about that when we were there, but I mean, makes sense. It was something Hitler did. He was, he was all about that.
What was your takeaway from Dresden?
It was cool. I really like that. That was interesting. The oldest bar we went to in Dresden was an Irish pub. What was it called again?
The Red Rooster?
Red Rooster, right. And I told Julie that, and she's like, oh, why isn't it the Rota, whatever their word is for rooster? I'm like, I don't know. And then we walked in, and it was a Irish pub. Kind of like, oh, that makes sense why it's an English word. Because it wouldn't make sense to have it be the oldest bar in Dresden and still be an English word, I mean, if somebody opened up a bar in Dresden now, they'd give it an English name, but, 100 years ago or so, it would have all been German names.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyways, I think it was really interesting doing remote stuff. I would like to try some more down the road and see if it's a thing. If you guys, if our listener out there thinks that they might want to check more of that kind of stuff out, let us know.
What'd you think, Zach?
Also, just as a caveat, if you did enjoy listening to the piece we did in Dresden, please go to our YouTube channel. Just look up "We Can Edit That Out" on YouTube, and you can see the whole video sequences that we shot there
Mhm.
in downtown Dresden, in the car, and also in the Hygiene Museum.
Yeah, it was a good time.
Yeah,
You had fun?
I had a blast,
Okay, cool.
as always.
That's what matters. But we were also talking about it, and like differences of living in Germany versus not living in Germany, or traveling Germany. Like not too many people who don't live in Germany will just take a day trip to Dresden. You know, it doesn't have that big of a draw for the casual tourists. You know, but for us, it's like, oh yeah, cool. Let's go see some history. You know,
Yeah,
and so that's one interesting thing about living in Germany is we get to see a lot of history that we wouldn't bother with as much
that's true.
just being punk tourists, you
It's
know?
true. And sometimes when you lived in a place for so long as we have, because we're both kind of creeping up on a decade of living out here, which is
Yeah.
crazy to think about. It's not always about going to big name cities to see the big monument or something. A lot of times we're actually starting to explore the kind of more hidden underside of the country that maybe people don't really talk about, but we identify because oh yeah, there's like a really sick hiking place down there, or
Right. The intent was to go to Saxony, Swiss and
yeah,
go hiking, but we got rained out. So we just spent 2 days in Dresden instead of going to the nature. We really did a good exploration of the city, which we've never done.
yeah,
Because you and I were there together 20 some years ago,
yeah,
but
it's
we were
true.
just there for like half a day, you
Yeah,
know?
and we didn't really get to see much because like we had just been partying our brains out for days, and I think we got to Dresden on a Sunday. Everything was closed, and we just sort of like walked through the town, got something to eat. I think it was like one of the few days on that trip we were on that we just went to the hotel and
Yeah.
went to sleep.
I think all of us,
Yeah,
all of us that were there together, just cashed in the chips.
yeah, because I think we were coming back from Prague.
We come back from Prague, or were we going to? I think we were going. Fuck, I don't remember which way it was.
I think it was coming back because I think we were pretty haggard. Like
Where did we meet the leprechaun at?
we met Patrick in Leipzig at Zorfest.
And then,
I'm guessing that's my best guess
and then
because I feel like we spent like 4 or 5 days in Prague,
yeah,
something like that.
because then we came back up to Berlin and spent like a week in Berlin.
Yeah,
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 and saw a really bad version of Broken Bones
yeah. That was, whew,
and a great version of Citizen Fish. So
that's true. Yeah,
Speaking of which, what have you been listening to lately? That was a good. That was a
yeah,
segue.
not bad. Earlier this week, both of us went to go see a legendary Italian punk band called CCCP, Fidea alla Linea. This is a band that formed and met in Kreuzberg in the 80s. And they were all like Italian students or expats that were like living in West Berlin at the time. They formed a punk band. And, I didn't really know who CCCP were until I moved here. And I was obsessed with Italian punk, but it never really like showed up on my radar. Like I always knew about bands like Wretched and Impact and Raw Power and stuff like that. But when I
Negazione.
when I started meeting Italians, CCCP or CCCP, as they would say,
Mhm.
was like this sort of like heavily revered cult following band. And I guess the best way to describe them is, there's like a French band called Barrier Noir who are kind of like a French theatric version of Crass.
Mhm.
And I think CCCP is kind of like the Italian interpretation of this. It's a band that's like rooted in 80s anarcho punk, but had all of these folk and traditional influences that they added on top of playing like political anarcho punk.
Yeah, and with weird people on stage dancing. So a real similar thing. Barrier Noir had a drum machine, or a keyboard doing the beats, and then that was CCCP as well. And then they had weird people dancing on stage. Because when you said Barrier Noir, I was like, oh, that's the perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't know who Barrier Noir is, so I also like that you compared them to Crass. So then people can start to do the translation of the translation of the translation,
Yeah.
and That's it.
Yeah, and if
It's
anyone's
really,
interested, like on our YouTube channel, we'll make a little playlist and we'll put some Bury Noir and CCCP, and you can kind of get
and maybe a crass song
and
too.
maybe a Crass song too, and you can kind of get a sense of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But what was interesting about this show was that this band hasn't played a show as their full lineup in like decades. And they announced one show in Berlin and it sold out like immediately. And then they announced a second show, sold out immediately. And it was really interesting because these concerts, all 3 nights, were basically just almost 90% Italians.
Right.
And not just Italians, but Italians that like flew from Italy or Croatia or anywhere in the Mediterranean they might be to come specifically to Berlin to witness this because it was like this once in a lifetime thing. And so it was actually a pretty interesting thing to witness. And I had a blast at the show. It was
Mhm.
super fun.
Yeah, it was funny because me and Julie got in line for the coat check, and this lady gets up in the coat check line behind us, starts speaking Italian to Julie, and she turns around, she's like, "I'm sorry, what?" Like, "Oh, I'm sorry," goes into English because the lady just assumed that everybody who was at that show was Italian.
Yeah.
You know, what was your take on because I had noticed that the Italians are a bit different at the concerts than no, it was everybody was really really alive at that concert
Yeah.
instead of just standing there nodding their head at best. Everybody was had their fists in the air and
Sure.
singing and jumping around and dancing. I was just like, oh shit, this
Well,
is fucking great.
one thing that we didn't, maybe be totally aware of is that like this band is like a cultural institution in Italy. And after their sort of formative punk years, they transitioned into a band called CSI. And I think that's after the wall came down and after the Soviet Union disbanded.
Mhm.
And CSI became a very commercially successful, like almost not totally mainstream band, but like, maybe at the same level that like Sonic Youth is or something in the States, where it's like they're very well known culturally. So when we were at the show, we were surrounded by people that knew every single fucking lyric of all of these songs. And everybody had their like hands up, everyone was dancing, and it was interesting seeing that kind of participation from for us was just like, oh, this is just some 80s punk band.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm not sure we would see similar stuff so much like that in the States, but I think Italians from my experience tend to be a lot more passionate about songs and like I don't know. It's hard to
Yeah,
explain.
and the closer the culture is to the equator, the more passionate they are.
Hmm.
You know, like you don't really hear about the red hot fiery Norwegians so much. Yeah. So I don't know. It was just kind of interesting. Being able to witness stuff like that culturally, living in a place like Germany that is such a multicultural mecca.
I felt like at that show we were kind of witnessing a bit of a historical moment.
Oh yeah, it
It
was
was like this band, this was like their 40th anniversary. This was them returning to the city that they're from.
the scene of the crime.
And, I think all of this cultural and political energy that was around the Cold War in the 80s was the fueling drive behind this artistic project of these Italian musicians living in Germany. And we just sort of watched the whole thing come full circle. And the event was called CCCP in DDDR, and they added the extra D to DDR for the decentralized Deutsche Democratic
Oh,
Republic.
that's what they did there.
Yeah.
I thought they were just trying to make it a little more like of a rhyme.
Yeah, but I mean that's
Okay.
that's why they did
But
that.
they did have it. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I didn't realize that. That was good. Yeah, Matko at the concert, he said to me, when he moved to Berlin, and Matko's a Italian friend of ours, and he said when he moved to Berlin, that he would sometimes daydream about, wow, how wouldn't it be cool if I could see CCCP in Berlin where they started? Oh, that would be a dream. But now I'm here. And
Yeah.
I'd never really heard of him, but Matko had 2 extra tickets that he kind of bought for me and Julie, kind of made us pay for. So he bought them, but then we paid him back. But it was 55 euros, and at the time it's like, fuck, that's a lot of money to go see a band I never really was into. But I kind of went just for the experience of going with him to see the little child's glow in his face, when he's like at his fucking dream concert,
Yeah.
and I thought, it's gonna be worth it just to be part of something so epic,
Yeah.
you know. And it was 3 nights sold out, and everybody I was talking to was really wanting to steal my ticket. And the more they did, the more I would thought, like, well,
Actually, maybe I should go to
now I
this.
want to go even
you know?
more. you know, like when everybody's talking about the restaurant that you can't get reservations to, like now I really want to go.
Yeah.
you know?
I was really familiar with the first EP, the Orthodoxia EP. That's like, so those are like their most famous like first punk songs
Yeah,
that like a lot of
yeah.
people know. And I heard some later stuff, but I was really kind of going into it a little green as well, and I think I don't know, it was a great experience.
How'd you hear about them? Because to me, they never really got to the States.
Hanging out with
so much.
Italians, man.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I hang out with I guess when I was backtracking and what do you call it? Pre-listening before a concert, I'm like, well, I should probably listen to them before I go. Quite a few of the songs, though, it was like, fuck, actually, I do think I know this. Yeah, from
Yeah.
just hanging out in punk bars in Europe and people playing music over the speakers.
Yeah. It's just interesting because, like, I thought I had a pretty good handle on what Italian 80s hardcore was all about. And this band totally, maybe it's just because they weren't on compilations that, they weren't on the Peace and War comp. They weren't,
Right.
they weren't like talked about so much. But
Anger
in
bacterias,
Italy,
or
like,
tons of bacteria. Sorry.
in Italy, like this band is like a foundation of Italian punk rock. So
That's crazy. I wouldn't
Yeah.
have thought that.
it's really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like how some bands can just be, we're pretty, I would say you and I are pretty up to date on,
We're up to date on the past.
on the past. Totally. But this one kind of slipped through, and then it was really after I moved here and go travel in Italy or go play shows there, I started really getting exposed to this band. So that's how I know about them. That's why I went.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks, Italians.
Thanks, Italians. Are we at a cigarette break yet?
I think we're definitely at a cigarette break.
Okay, cool. Back in a minute.
All right.
Enjoy the music.
Did you have a German word, by the way?
Oh, right. We forgot to do German words. Yeah. Mine is a Schwerkraft.
Schwerkraft.
Schwerkraft. That's the literal translation is heavy force, and that's their word for gravity.
Okay.
Yeah, which is very descriptive. I mean, what better way to describe gravity than a force that's heavy?
It's true.
Uh,
I mean, they also have the word gravitate.
yeah, but I don't know that one.
Well, now you do.
Okay, cool.
Ha! You
Oh,
just
yeah.
learned something.
Teach me German. Cool. Yeah, we're gonna do all of season 3 in German, so stay tuned for that.
Yeah, we're totally gonna do that.
What's your German word?
I feel like all my German words are not fun.
You do the technical ones. It's fine.
Yeah.
I can do the fun ones.
so-
You do the technical ones.
My German word is Steuererklärung.
Now, why is it that?
Steuer is the German word for taxes, and Erklärung is like a declaration. So a tax declaration is something that we have to do every year. It's basically like your tax return in the States, but we have to total up all the money that we made and give a hideously large a portion of it to the Finanzamt in Germany, which is like the German version of the IRS. So yeah, I just did my Steuererklärung, and it's gonna be eating a lot of ramen in the next days, but not ramen in a restaurant, not the fun kind.
Ramen from the store.
Yeah.
Yeah. Germans love talking about taxes. When
Yes, they do.
when tax season rolls around, that's all they talk about. I remember sitting at a bar one time, like, I'm fucking leaving if one more fucking German starts talking about doing their taxes. And then two people started talking. I'm like, well,
Yeah,
I called it, got to do it. See you guys.
it's really a it's an
Boring conversation.
it's an obsession. But I mean, you know,
Hey, once you start doing them, though, you understand why they talk about it so
yeah.
much because it is a fucking like a life changing experience every year.
Yeah,
You
and
know?
also Germany has one of the most complicated tax systems in the world, and even native speaking Germans have a very difficult time navigating the software platform and the electronic transmission system that you have to use to submit all of your information. It's very, very convoluted. It's almost impossible to do as a non-German speaker without the assistance of a Steuerberater, which is like a tax advisor. And yeah, it's a mess, and I go through hell every year getting this done. But you know, I just finished mine, so I feel good.
Hmm. I told you about what happened with me and my taxes, right?
No,
Okay. Well, we can't really talk about it in this episode. So anyway, we're gonna move on.
but what
Uh,
happened?
can't talk about it. I'll tell you when the red light is off.
All
You know.
right,
But
he
yes.
already told me. I already know.
So that, but this is part of living in Berlin, and episode 9 we talked about this episode being about because we previously had talked about moving to Berlin. That's one part of it. Now we've been here for almost 10 years. Now we need to address what it's like to actually live here. What is it? What is Berlin?
Yeah, a couple months ago, I took my bike to get tuned up, and I was speaking German. The guy, he has a shop right around the corner from here. It's the first time I took my bike to him. He's an old school Berlin dude, and he didn't speak a word of English. So I was kind of, you know, making my way through German, trying to explain what was wrong with my bike. And then he asked me, how long have I lived here? And I was like, oh, you know, seit 2015, since 2015. Then he goes, ah, du bist Est Berliner. Like,
Oh, so you're a real Berliner?
yeah. So
Huh.
I've heard from other people in the city that once you've lived here for like 8 years, 7, 8 years,
Yeah, you can consider
you're
yourself a Berliner.
basically like a Berliner.
You're
So
not a fucking tourist anymore.
yeah.
Uh,
So that actually felt quite good.
huh.
Actually.
I mean, Matco told me that recently as well, because Matco moved here right about the same time we did. You know?
Okay.
And they said, we've been living here this long. We're Berliners now, and he was very happy about it.
So,
And
so let me ask you something.
what?
What would you say is like the definitive characteristic of a Berliner?
Oh man, somebody who doesn't speak German. Ah, you
It's pretty good.
walked into
That's
that.
good. That's real good.
Well, I mean, the thing is I live here on a Latvian passport, so I don't need to learn German like you do with your artist visa. I mean, part of your artist visa is you have to get to a certain level of German to stay here. Well, with me, I'm a European Union citizen, so until Germany leaves the European Union or Latvia does, I can stay here risk free.
Mm.
It's great. I also know that I'm very lucky for having that option, and I don't feel bad for you, but I empathize with your pain when you have to jump through the fucking massive hoops that you do. It's a lot what you have to do to stay here.
And we talked about this a bit last episode when I was getting my visa renewed, you know, but you really have
Mhm.
to go through kind of a presentation process where you have to like produce all of this paperwork that basically justifies your existence in a country, you
Mhm.
know, like I have to show, you know, I've got a contract on a flat. I have health insurance. I have regular money coming in. I'm not depending on the social welfare system to survive. And you really have to kind of present this to whoever's sitting across the desk from you. And it's up to them to give you a stamp or to tell you to fuck off, you know. But anyways, I want to get back to this sort of like
Yeah. Sorry. I was thinking
the
about that in my head too. I wanted to know what your take on what makes a Berliner. Because it's not necessarily Germans that make a Berliner. The Berliner is a special, unique thing.
there's a bit of a rough edge there. You know, like a lot of other places in Germany, I feel like the general populace is very, you know, composed, established people that aren't necessarily like super serious, but like they have a very kind of standard way of living. Berliners, on the other hand, are way more decadent, I think. You know, one of the big cultural institutions here is this club culture thing, you know, this really extravagant, heavy partying, big focus on art. Also, the people in general have sort of a bit of anti capitalist DNA to them.
One thing, and a lot of people might not realize this, but everywhere in the world you go, you will see signs that say no cash, credit cards only. Berlin is the only city in the world I've ever been to where almost every place you go into it says cash only, no credit cards.
Exactly.
Because they don't fucking trust that shit.
Yeah.
And to them, cash is king because everybody's working a hustle, you know, and
Yeah.
shit like this.
Berlin has a similar energy to maybe some places kind of like New York or London, where it's a big city and there's a lot of hustle going on and it's a very fast paced thing. But at the same time, Berlin also has this sort of easygoing, you don't really need to go to work.
Yeah.
You know, like come to the park and drink 10 beers with us. The sun is out for the first time in 4 months, you know?
Well, if you've noticed, the only people with 9 to 5 jobs in Berlin are the Germans.
That's not necessarily true.
I know. I thought of that one time when I'd only been living here a couple of years, but it is kind of a sort of an interesting thing. It's like New York and London where you have these melting pots with a lot of different cultures going on, and you have this free and easy spirit, but it also has that edge of German traditionalism in it, where everybody waits at the crosswalk and everybody does this at the there and stand in line properly here, and oh, it's polite if you don't talk on the subway, you know. I was talking with Matko once. I was smoking under a sign that said no smoking. You know, he's like, "Hey, don't you see the sign?" I'm like, "We're in Berlin. That's just a suggestion." And that's he and my running joke now is like anytime he's like, yeah, it's just a suggestion, you know. There's one story I want to tell because sorry, it's a little bit out, but it kind of explains Berlin to me. So I'm on the subway one time, and late at night, you know, it's just me and one other guy on in our car, and the guy gets up, stands up, and takes a piss in the car, which isn't unusual in a big city. Of course, that happens in every big city. It's like, whatever. But he gets off at the very next stop. He basically finishes pissing and the door's open and he gets off. And I'm like, dude, you couldn't wait 1 minute and piss at the fucking platform? You know, you got to leave me with your stink, you know? And it's just like, I don't know, you know, the whole urinate, not urinating in you know, cars. It's just a suggestion, you know. Yeah, so it's like that. It's like there's rules here, but people kind of do whatever they want as long as they're not hurting anybody, and nobody really cares. But that's also like New York and London and probably other big cities that we aren't mentioning because we're stuck on New York and London. But what is the real specific thing about Berlin that sets it apart from?
I think it's the lifestyle. I think the lifestyle of Berliners is what makes the city what it is. Like, for example, if you're going out to a party, you know, and there's going to be like DJs there and stuff, the difference with Berlin is that you're probably not going to show up to this thing until it's like 1 in the morning.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
Whereas like back
Party don't
home,
get going until then.
2 a.m. is like when shit's closing, you know? So Berlin has it's a very nightlife oriented place, at least for our sphere of what we know Berlin as, you know? And I have to qualify this by saying that when we're talking about this sort of like nightlife culture, we're really talking primarily about 3, maybe 4 neighborhoods, 4 or 5 neighborhoods in the city that even adhere to that. Because once you go further west and you're in like Schöneberg, Charlottenburg and stuff, it's a totally different world.
Yeah,
And what's really interesting to me is like before the wall came down, you know, West Berlin was the hearth of all of the party and the, you know, the alternative subculture and stuff. A lot of that subculture was also happening in the DDR, but it was very heavily repressed by the Stasi.
Mhm.
And, you know, punks would get like swept up on the street and dragged
yeah.
into interrogation for 48 hours, got the shit kicked out of them, dumped back on the street, you know, like everyone had a file on them. So there was a lot more at stake. But in West Berlin, particularly in the 80s, you know, that was the new Weimar Republic, basically. That was the roaring 20s, but in the 80s, you know, it was just everybody is just like living cheap and occupying abandoned buildings and stuff, remnants of what was bombed out in the war, and creating subculture. And Berlin was always sort of behind other major metropolitan cities in Europe because it was late to the capitalist game. And when the wall came down, you know, everyone starts flocking to the West for the prosperity. But what they left behind was a bunch of abandoned buildings in the East. So a lot of the punks and a lot of the counterculture that were existing in the West, while everyone was flocking to the West, a lot of those people started piling over into the East. And that's when you have the emergence of techno, you have the emergence of like squatter culture. Techno and squatter culture also really kind of like dovetailed too, because a lot of those people were involved in the punk scene that were getting into techno as well. So like, it's really interesting to me that West Berlin now is a place where there's like almost no show venues or places that you would really go for nightlife. Almost all of that is happening in Kreuzberg, in Friedrichshain, Prenzlauer Berg.
Kreuzberg was West Berlin.
Kreuzberg was West Berlin, but it's right on the border.
Yeah.
So Kreuzberg, honestly, is
There's
sort
like
of
a central area: Kreuzberg, Friedrichshain, Neukölln, Prenzlauer Berg.
Yeah.
These are your party neighborhoods.
Exactly.
This is where your nightlife culture
yeah,
explodes. As soon as you get into Mita, it's just dead at night.
it is.
You
There's a couple
know?
there's a couple cool bars to hang out there at night.
Sure. I mean, there's
And-
couple cool bars in every neighborhood, but there's nothing like RAW in the rest of Berlin. You
Yeah.
know? And it's places like that that really make Berlin. You know, the Berghain,
Mhm.
RAW, Kit Kat Club, which is like the super fetish techno club here. There's these places, and if people haven't been to them, then they really don't get what makes Berlin. You know, Kit Kat and Berghain are very techno oriented, but RAW is a giant complex of different clubs, and they got, you know, places where they have punk shows, places where they have metal shows, places where they have goth shows, places where they have everything you can think of at one night or the other, except maybe like country line dancing or some shit like that. But that kind of went out of style with the kids in last couple years, I think. But anyway, that's one of the big things that separates Berlin from the rest of the world. The Koopy, you know.
Yeah.
There's no places like this anywhere else in the world that I've been to.
Yeah.
You know, you had Ungdomshuset in Copenhagen, but that's still not really the Koopy. It has a different vibe to it.
Yeah. I mean, also like Ungdomshuset had some state funding.
Yeah.
As well, but they also were brutally repressed by the police when they got evicted, and a lot of those people went to jail for a few years, you know.
But the Koopy just is its own. It's really, there's nothing like it anywhere else, and there's nothing like Berghain. There's nothing like Kit Kat. There's nothing like RAW. Is there any other places I'm forgetting? I mean, there's SO36, but that's anywhere you find a place like that. And there's Wild at Heart. You can find a place like that anywhere. But these places, these clubs, that nothing like that anywhere else.
And I mean, a lot of them are revitalized spaces that maybe were administrative buildings or factories or things that were used during the war, and they were abandoned after the end of the war.
Remember the first time we went to smoke on the back of the Koopy when we were staying there in 2001, and the whole top part of it was just gone. Like it got blowed the fuck up in the
Yeah.
war. You know, we went outside to smoke a cigarette in the back half because we were usually going out on the front part, but we went in the back part and we're looking around like, holy fuck, this is why this is here. Cause it got blown the fuck up. And then somebody moved into the part that was still habitable.
Yeah.
And so like, cool, nobody else wants it. We'll take it, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, I mean, the Kuppy used to be a luxury hotel
Yeah.
back in the day.
Right. When we saw what was Agnes's band after Homo Militia?
Oh, Lost.
Lost. When we went to see Lost in 2001 and they had it in the area where they hardly ever have shows,
Mhm.
and we look up and there's this gigantic chandelier, like it looked hundreds of years old and super ornate, and it's in the middle of this crazy
Crazy punk
fucking
show.
gnarly fucking punk show, you know? And we were both just like, I think this used to be a ballroom.
Yeah.
You know? Rich people with monocles and fucking tuxes with tails, like doing the whatever they did, the waltz, yeah,
Yeah.
shit like that. So it's fucking crazy.
So-
There's nothing else like that.
So for you, what defines living in Berlin to you versus like our lives back in Seattle or like when you're living in Portland? Like how is your life here distinguished from just living anywhere else in like a metropolitan area?
Well, for me, I think the big thing is I'm not worried about getting shot here. And not that I really was in Portland or Seattle, but even in those cities, as tame as those cities were, you still kind of had to have eyes in the back of your head when you went out at night, you know? I know a lot of people that live in Seattle and Portland are like, oh, what are you talking about? It's such a safe city. And you think that until you move here and you realize how easy it is to live here. I don't know, when people ask me why I live here, I would say, man, you read the fucking news, you know? You read the news about America and you wonder why I moved here. That place is fucked up, you know?
And both Seattle and Portland have gotten far more dangerous since we've lived there too.
Yeah, exactly. But it's really hard for me to put a tag on because to me it's just like when people ask me why I like living here, I always just say because it's so fucking easy. They go, "What do you mean by that?" I'm like, "I'm not sure, but it's the feeling you get when you live here of just like fuck, life is easy, you know." And of course, there's difficult parts like you with the Finanzamt and the Steuerberaten brothers and stuff like that. You know, that ain't easy. But once you get these forms filled out and everything triplicate signed, you know, life is just not easy in an easy way, but easy in a loose and free way, I guess. I don't know. Does that make any sense?
Sure.
Do you feel the same thing, or do you have a different take on what it is to live in Berlin?
At least I can only speak from my experience, but I've also talked to a lot of people in the city, particularly people like us that moved here from other places. You know, maybe for native Berliners, they might have a totally different answer to this question. But what I've learned about this place is that Berlin is a place that you can take your ideas and your vision of what you want your life to be like, and you can make it happen. There's the resources, there's the spaces, there's the support network to kind of do whatever you want with your life. But it comes at a cost, and the cost is that you really have to go through a couple years of really gross insecurity.
Yeah.
You have to maybe compromise a lot of your own boundaries or learn what those boundaries are. And almost everybody I know here has gone through some sort of really hardcore loss or fundamental life change. But then when you come out of it and when you really start to understand how it all works together, then you kind of rise from the ashes and you sort of actualize what you moved here for.
So Berlin is where phoenixes are possible.
I think so. And it's strange that Phoenix isn't the place to do that.
No, too hot.
Yeah, it's terrible there.
Hot city.
That's at least what I've garnered, and I think it's
No,
different. I think it's different from living in other cities because, like, in Seattle, when I moved there, I felt like I found my community and my people relatively quickly.
Mhm.
I moved to Seattle without knowing a single person.
Well, you were younger too.
I was also much younger.
It's easier
Yeah.
to make friends when you're younger.
Yeah, that is true. I wasn't like held over the burning coals
Yeah.
in Seattle so much. You know,
Uh,
here, and maybe this is just like the immigrant perspective. Like you're in a new place, new language, different culture, different customs. You have to navigate a whole gnarly sense of bureaucracy. You're also, I think the other thing about Berlin that makes it different is that a lot of people are here seemingly to kind of like reinvent themselves in a way.
yeah, yeah, exactly. This is the perfect
So
city for reinvention.
but
Oh,
that
yeah.
also comes at a
It's the
cost.
city of phoenixes.
That also comes at a cost too, because like if you want to have a meaningful relationship or like a really close connected friendship, it's harder to get those here because so many people are trying to redefine what their life is about. And in order to do that, they try to not have any super close, meaningful connections with people because they don't want anyone holding them back. Or they always have their eyes out on the horizon looking for the next better thing to come around.
Yeah, that's a real thing in Berlin.
Yeah.
Nobody makes plans here because something cooler might come up that they want to do at the last minute.
Exactly.
So it's like, cool, let's get together Saturday. Yeah, cool. If nothing else comes up that's better than you, I'll see you then. And if somebody
Exactly.
says that to me, it's not an insult. It's like, cool, gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, I was about to say the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just a given.
Yeah.
You know.
I think that's going to be like the crucible for a lot of people here is that I think a lot of people in general do desire that kind of closeness with others. And I think a lot of people crash and burn here because,
Yeah, because they don't get it.
or they're just stuck in the party tornado. And when you're in the party tornado, like everyone is like super friendly and nice, and you know, you're meeting people and you're getting drunk on a sidewalk, you know, and it's all great. But if something really bad happens to you and you need to reach out to somebody to
Yeah,
like
you got
help,
Yeah.
you're kind of fucked. So
Yeah.
I felt like my first years here, I was spending a lot of time, you know, trying to figure out what my place was here, but also kind of searching for those sort of deeper connections. And it wasn't until I had to kind of rise from the grave to actually understand who those real, you know, solid people were.
Yeah, sure.
And I think a lot of people have a similar experience here. And I think that is also a defining characteristic of like what it is to be a Berliner in a way, you know? Like it's like a weird trial by fire kind of thing.
Yeah, because I mean, you remember when we moved here, we were hanging out with a lot of other people who had just moved here.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the thing when you move to Berlin, you kind of make friends with other people who are also searching for friends. So I don't think it was unique to us. I think it's a real thing that when people here, they probably have a clique of other people who just moved there, you know, and then now all those people are gone. It's just like you and me still here.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's interesting. Coming back to Italians, one thing about Berlin, and I don't mean this in a judgmental way, but a lot of the nationalities will kind of hang out with their own nationalities.
A little bit, yeah.
Like the Americans will hang out with, I mean, Americans not as much because everybody speaks English. So I don't think we're as trapped by language as a lot of the other nationalities are. Like I know a lot of the Italians primarily hang out with other Italians. Spanish primarily hang out with other Spanish, you know. And I think the same is true with the Turkish as well. And it's not a judgment. It's like, yeah, I get that because it's just more comfortable for you to speak in your native language.
Sure.
And I have friends here, Germans, who don't speak English that well. Guys like Stunk. I love the guy, you know? He's a good friend. I've known him since the day I moved here. I went over to his house and had Christmas dinner there, you know? But he barely speaks English. So we've known each other forever. We have a great time together, but we don't have long conversations. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting place for that. because there's multicultural and it's all like people, other cultures feeding off of each other's cultures, but there's also like a cultural fences.
Mm.
So that's another part of what it is to be a Berliner, you know? Be from somewhere else in another city, hanging out with people from the other same place in the city and making a whole new place out of it. I was tattooing this Turkish guy, you know, and we have a stereotype of the Turkish in Berlin as big beards are very typical for Turkish people in Berlin. And he and I were talking about it, and because we were just laughing about hair and beards and stuff, and I was like, "Oh, I can't grow a beard." He's like, "I can't grow hair on my head. Hey, maybe we swap a bit, you know?" And I go, "No, you got plenty of hair on your head." He goes, "Yeah, because I went back to Turkey, had him put some in," and I was cracking up. I'm like, "Oh my god, we'll do a whole episode about that," you know, about people going to Turkey to get hair and teeth, you know, because it's so cheap over there. But he told me that it's funny because it's a stereotype. But he said, yeah, but it's totally true that that's what the Turkish in Berlin do. But when we go back to Turkey, the Turkish in Turkey laugh at us and go, "Oh, you must be from Berlin with that beard," because that trend kind of went away in Turkey.
Mm.
You know, that's an old, outdated trend that people still emulate here. And I thought, wow, that's fucking fascinating. You know?
Yeah. Well, it's also like the Turkish immigrants in Berlin, from what I understand, are a bit culturally different from your mainstream metropolitan Turkish people in Turkey.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah,
That's
you know?
exactly what I meant, you know? And it's like a whole culture that kind of, you know, a lot of Turkish moved over here after World War II to help rebuild the country. So you have several generations of Turkish over here, and they've kind of become their own Berliners.
Yeah.
You know, with a Turkish background. You know,
Yeah.
they're Turkish Berliners. They're not actual Turkish. So when they go back to Turkey, they're like, "You're not real Turkish.
Yeah.
You're a Berliner Turkish." You know, so it's a strange place
Yeah.
for that. You know, and
Yeah.
and like I said, I'm not passing judgment on anything. It's always difficult when you're talking about other cultures to be culturally sensitive. You know, but I think I did an okay job of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, like I think this was like a great way to wrap up season 2.
Yeah.
We kind of went into some like new territory in the season. It was like super fun, and I think we have a lot of stuff planned for season 3.
I mean, obviously, anybody who's been listening long enough knows that we're going to talk about trilogies in season 3. I can't wait for that. This is going to be good. So I think, yeah, I think this episode is good, and we should just call it a ciao.
Yeah, I think we're good. Let's go to Taga.
Let's go to Utaga.
Cool.
Ciao.
All right, ciao.
We can edit that out! We can edit that out! Hey! We can edit that out!
Hey, if you like what you subscribed, why don't you come hear us on Instagram?
That's totally not how you do that.
No. It's, if you hear what you like, subscribe to us on Instagram.
No, that's
At-
not. That's also not how it works.
Yeah. So, well, why don't you do this one?
Okay.
This is better.
If you like what you just
See,
heard,
now you can't do it.
it's only because you're taunting me.
But that's the podcast.
If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe. Write a review. It really helps us out. Wherever you get your podcasts and your stories, yeah, just do it
Yeah.
and like it.
Do it and like it. Because we're guys who like doing it.
Yeah. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We can edit that out. You can find, video versions of our podcast and some extra stuff that you might not see on other channels. So if
That's
you're
right.
if you want to know about the weird bands that we're in and the stuff we like, and maybe see us walking around Dresden doing weird stuff, then go check us out on YouTube.
Yeah, check it out for the visuals.
Yeah,
Is that good, or we do another one?
we could do another one.
Let's call it good. I'm all talked out. When I didn't get really that drunk this episode. I didn't. Look, I still got like a quarter of a bottle of wine left.
I thought I knew you.
Well, I mean, see, I can measure it. I've drank exactly 1,500 milliliters of wine. But it's half wine, half water. So it's not 1,500 milliliters. It's 750 milliliters of wine.
You have been living here a long time, because now you're all talking in metric.
Yeah. I still don't understand Celsius.
Yeah. Let's go to Tatagon.
Let's go to Tataga!